People retire with typically both a pension and an ISA. And in this video, I'm going to look at some tax strategies that you can get the most out of retirement by looking at combinations of when to take the pension and when to take the ISA. And specifically, I'm going to be looking at defined contribution pensions. So the traditional solution would be to utilize your personal allowance using maybe a state pension or a defined contribution pension, could be a workplace pension or your own private pension, and then use the ISA. And the reason why you do this is because you would be paying no income tax upfront. And this could help to mitigate the sequence of returns risk in retirement. So you're likely to retire when the market is at or close to an all-time high. Few people voluntarily retire in the middle of a stock market crash. And so that means that in the first few years of retirement, you might have bad returns from the stock market. And if you're not having to pay the tax man during those years, then your money can go a little bit further. And then another advantage of this strategy is that you've got pension at the end, and a pension is potentially intergenerational wealth. It can be passed on without any inheritance tax. Though, of course, that's now going to be changing from April 2027. And that's why we've got to now re-examine this strategy and try and find the best solution. So we need to consider the differences between a pension and an ISA. And first of all, we're going to look at contributions. So if you're over 75, you can't put any money into a pension anymore. If you're under 75, but you've got no earned income, then the most you can put in is 3,600 gross, which would actually be 2,880, and then the government would add some tax back on that. If you have earned income, but you've already taken some of your pension, then the most you can put in is £10,000, providing that you do have enough earned income. And then if you're working, you've not taken your pension, you can put £60,000 into a pension gross if you have enough earnings, and you can also go back 3 years. And then with an ISA, as long as you're over 18 and a UK resident, you can put £20,000 into an ISA. So what this is saying is that in later life, it is going to be possible to move money from a pension into an ISA, but it's going to be quite difficult to move money from an ISA into a pension, although quite why you'd want to do so is maybe a bit of a mystery. So the maximum amount of tax-free cash that you can have in a pension is £268,275. And currently that amount is not indexed. So if you've got a total of over £1,073,100 in your pension, then it might be worthwhile moving some of the tax-free cash out of your pension because it's not going to grow over time potentially. Whereas with an ISA, the amount you can put in that is unlimited. So you put in 20,000 a year, but it can grow and grow and just keep growing. So that's why some people move tax-free cash from a pension into an ISA. So there are a couple of advantages of having a pension or some sort of pension in later life. And the first one is gifting. So you can gift excess income and it won't be subject to inheritance tax. And the rules around this, they're a bit complicated, but it's basically the gifting should not diminish your standard of living, that the gift has to come out of pensions or maybe dividends, and they should be part of a pattern. So you should be gifting ideally like the same amount every year for a few years to demonstrate this really is an excess and that you just got too much money and you want to pass it on. So HMRC will tend to look back over a few years just to see what's going on with your gifting, to see whether they'll allow it or not. Now with an ISA, this is deemed to be part of your capital. So you can't gift excess income from an ISA. So gifting from an ISA would be subject to the 7-year rule. So you've got to gift 7 years or more before you die for it not to be subject to inheritance tax. So for that reason, towards the end of your life, it might be advantageous to have some money in a pension. And then the other advantage of a pension is that you can use it at any time to buy an annuity. So you'd be taking a pot that is potentially subject to income tax and then buying a taxable guaranteed income stream. So you could also potentially buy an annuity from an ISA, but this would mean you'd be taking something that's free of income tax and then buying an income stream that is subject to that income tax. So it wouldn't really make much sense. So a pension in later life can be useful as an insurance policy against longevity risk. Also with the pension, if you die before the age of 75, then the pension can be inherited free of income tax. So its status would be similar to an ISA. So after April 2027, if you die before the age of 75, neither would have income tax and both would have inheritance tax. So now we're going to look at an example in terms of someone taking from their ISA first or their pension first and what happens to the tax they pay and how their wealth changes over time. They've got £600,000 in their pension, £150,000 in the ISA. We're going to remove inflation from the model. They're going to have full entitlement to the state pension. They're going to take £35,000 in the initial years of their retirement, then £28,000, and then £24,500. And I've set the ISA priority age at 55, so they're going to take from the ISA first. So in terms of the wealth, in terms of the purchasing power, it's going down over time, the ISA disappearing. And then in terms of the sources of income, they're using the ISA, they're using some tax-free cash from their pension under UF Plus, and then they've got the state pension kicking in. In terms of the tax they're paying, initially it's no tax at all. Then they've got a year where they've got some of the ISA, so paying a bit of tax. Then they're using their pension with some tax-free cash. The income drops down, then the tax-free cash runs out, and then they're using the pension with the full marginal tax rate. Total tax paid is £94,000, and in terms of their wealth, it's going to be £103,000 at today's money, but because it's all in a pension, if we take 20% off to allow for income tax to access it, it's going to be about £82,000. And now if we change things so that the ISA is taken from last, the wealth is actually lower overall, but because there's no tax to be paid, no income tax to be paid, then the true value of the wealth arguably is higher if you take from the ISA last, because you've allowed this tax-free source to grow. And here's a graph of how we're using our sources of income if we take from the ISA last. So initially we're using the pension, we're taking 25% tax-free under UF Plus, we've got the state pension that kicks in, and then we start to use the ISA. And then here's a comparison of the income tax paid under both scenarios. With the sensitivity, we're paying tax initially, and then it all drops off once the pension's gone and the ISA kicks in. Whereas with the base case that I outlined first, it's kind of round the other way, and we actually pay less tax in total if we take from the ISA last. So we run our modeling in a spreadsheet because it's fully transparent, so you can trace through all the calculations if you want to see exactly what's going on. And it's also fully customizable. So for something like inheritance tax, I mean, who knows what the thresholds will be by the time you come to kick the bucket, but what you can do is just program up numbers that you like. So you could have it growing with inflation or not growing at all, or even all the way down to zero. It's up to you. Whereas if you use a package that's web hosted, you've got to go by their rules and you can't customize it yourself. And then also if you use something like Voyant, you've got to pay them every year to use the software, and so the lifetime cost can be very high. So I think wealth planning is part art and part science. From the science point of view, you might be better off if you have ISA left in your later years, but then you won't be able to easily buy an annuity and you won't be able to easily gift any excess money that you've got. So it does partly depend on your preferences as well as what your forecasting might end up in your bank account. So you could see a financial advisor and pay £1,500, maybe more, but it won't permanently solve your problem. It's like hiring a piano tuner that eventually the piano is still going to go and tune. And instead, you could just buy a tuning fork and do it yourself, which is exactly what the spreadsheet solution is. If this interests you, you can go to my website, ianshadrack.com, and when you're there, you can look at the spreadsheet that I use, but with some of the formulas removed. And then also you've got the series of videos that explain what's going on, so you can see how easy it is to use.